Everyone, my name is Adrian. I'm here all the way from Guatemala. Back at home, we have beautiful landscapes, delicious food, and of course, Android developers. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Firebase. And well, I'm going to save a couple of minutes at the end of the talk to share a little bit more about what I do. At the moment, I would like to introduce myself as a traveler and as a learner. Okay, so as my grandma used to say, let's start from the beginning. That's test subject 626, about to feel a flow of electrons through his body for the first time. That's me a couple of years ago. I grabbed wires and felt for the first time the electricity. It was fun, like a tingling sensation. And I think that describes a personality trait that we all have, curiosity. We are all curious, and for some reason, during our lifetime, we stop, or at least our curiosity decreases heavily. About that time, my dad, who have always been an entrepreneur, traveled a lot to the US, and that meant for me that I get a lot of toys that weren't available at my country. One of them being Lego sets. I used to be a big fan, still am. And I remember quite clear that once my dad arrived with a big bag of Legos, and it was not only nice because there were a lot of them, but also there were some pieces that I haven't seen before. There were new building blocks. I have always liked to build. And that's why I think I really enjoy to write code, because as coders or developers, we are building different kind of things. So I would like to introduce you to some of these building blocks that are available through Firebase. Firebase used to be only a real-time database with a couple of other features added afterwards, like static hosting and authentication. But since last I/O, they did a launch on a lot of new features. So now Firebase is like a complete suite for mobile development, and it's quite nice for a lot of reasons. These are like, at a glance, all the things that Firebase provides. There are some things that might be quite familiar for a lot of you, like analytics or notifications. This has been around for quite a while, just changed the brand and the name and a couple of new features. I think that it's really interesting that almost all of these features are available through many platforms. From the left-hand side of the graphic, real-time database, authentication, cloud messaging, storage, hosting is available for mobile and also for web. There are also another features mainly for mobile, available for both Android and iOS. So although there are many features, I'm going to share with you just a couple of them during this talk. That what I'm going to share is the real-time database and the authentication. And I'm also going to show how to easy the things even more using a library called Firebase Ui. But I think it's a good idea to explore all these features to try to take out the most of the tools. I think much like the Lego bricks, we can build different things, and it's quite useful for us as developers to have all these different tool sets to decide when it's convenient to use one or other of these available tools. Okay, so for authentication, keep in mind that the idea is that Firebase is going to handle all the flow for us. I'm going to eventually give you some more detail, but for now it's important to keep in mind that there's a console available, and in this console you can see the users. You can enable or disable different of the major providers like Facebook, Google, Twitter, GitHub, or email password, or even anonymous login. It includes different kind of things like when you're using an email password combination for authentication, you can set templates for email when the user forgot their password. Also, you can enable or disable users, etc. It's a basic console to do all the management of the users for our app. And the real-time database, it's the other thing that we're going to discuss during this session. And here are two things that are really important to have in mind. The first one is that the database, it's a real-time database. So instead of doing a lot of queries that we usually do for our backend, we work mostly with subscriptions to have an update when there are changes on the data. The other thing is that it's a NoSQL database. So we have to structure the data in a way that that makes sense for this. So we don't have to think in terms of tables with rows and columns. Instead, we're going to think on terms of nodes with children. This is really important. I guess many of you have worked already with different kind of NoSQL databases. But I've seen during the last couple of months a lot of newcomers to Firebase that are struggling mainly with how to structure the data. So these two things are really important. We're going to see examples in the code, but keep both in mind. OK, besides that, we're going to use a library called Firebase Ui that helps for both things, authentication and real-time database. This will help us with the adapter when we're going to want to show the data, and also with all the flow and the layout for the authentication on Android. OK, let's start with creating an app. This is the simplest thing on Firebase. I have several screenshots with URLs on the top. I'm going to share the slide afterwards. This is the main screen on Firebase. There's the URL. There you can create a new project. If you already have cloud projects, these are the same. If you have Firebase projects before this new launch at this year I/O, you need to migrate those projects for them to appear on this console. OK, we create a new project. We need a region for the analytics data to be identified. And afterwards, we see this menu on the left and get started here icon for Android, iOS, and web. We're going to work with Android. It asks us for a package name, and for some features, we need certificate signing. We're going to work with Google Authentication, so we need to set up this SHA-1 signing key. And afterwards, it let us know that we need to add some things to the Gradle file. When it's ready, we see that at the left, on top left, there's auth and database. These are the two things that we're going to work with right now. And this is the basic view for the database. It's not anything fancy, but it's quite useful to see the data that's stored on Firebase. I mean, it's not intended to be a fully client to manage the data, but at least you can see what's stored and make some modifications, or even add some data here. This is important mostly because sometimes you're going to use Firebase with a set of data that's already defined, that not require an input from the user. And using this console to input that data, it's not as comfortable as it would be using a client. So usually what I do is write a script. I like Ruby and JavaScript, so I write a script to get the data into Firebase and also to manage during the lifetime of the app. Also, here we can see another tab for the rules. And this is an old screenshot. Now we have another tab for the usage, how we are querying the database, when we are using it, and different kind of analytics specifically for the database. OK, the rules. By default, we're going to have the rules as shown here. sadly it's a little bit small. Let me see if I can do a zoom. Okay. So by default, the rules are required for users to be authenticated. There's like a simple language for setting the rules. The documentation, it's kind of not that clear on how you can use this language. There are a lot of resources, but it's not as intuitive as you might think. For now, we're going to change this, mostly because we are learning how to write data to Firebase. So instead of asking the user to be authenticated, we're just going to allow any read and write on the database. So we change this to this. So now anyone can write to the database. This is a bad idea if we are releasing into production. I know it's like common sense to don't allow everyone to write to the database, but I've seen some apps that are in production with the rules set it like this. Okay, we changed the rules to allow read and writes, and we're going to now add Firebase to our project in Android. First, we need to set the internet permission on the manifest. This might also appear like a little bit of common sense, but I've seen several projects, and it happened to me also every once in a while, that things are not working because the internet permission is not set. Afterwards, we need to modify the root level build.gradle, the Gradle file, and we add the reference to Google services. This is exactly what the wizard on the main page explained. And then we can choose which features we want to use. We are going to work with the real-time database. That's the second row. So now on the app level Gradle file, we add this reference to the database and also add the plugin for the Google services. The idea with this is that there are different kind of features, and we're going to work with only a small set of them. So we only add what we need. When I was a little kid, I used to play a lot with Legos that didn't came with a manual. Now there are a lot of different shiny sets. You can build really nice things. I actually just got a new set of Volkswagen, the Beetle, and it's fun to build these sets. But also, it's fun to build without instructions. It's also fun to build without any restriction. So we're going to do that. We're going to build something that's really simple just to know how to work with Firebase. And we're going to start with saving and retrieving some data. OK, this is going to be the structure for this minimum simple example. I'm going to have two nodes. There's an URL attached to each one of the nodes. We have the first one called message, and I'm going to write only a message on that, like hello world. And also, I have another node called words, and under that node, I have several children with an ID. On the left-hand side, you can see the ID. This is generated by Firebase. It's a unique identifier based on the timestamp. We're going to see now in just a few slides how to do this. OK, it's going to look like this, the layout. We're going to have just an edit text and a button to input whatever we want to send to the database. And on the console, we're going to see something like this. The message is going to be like hard-coded. Every time the app boots and starts, it will write hello world. And we're going to use the input to add words to this list. OK, for the layout, we need, as I mentioned, the edit text, the button, and that will be it. This is an XML file for that. In the lower part, you can see there's a URL for this. When you are watching afterwards the slides, you can easily go check this URL. I'm not going to dive that much into the layout. So writing to the database needs to work with a reference. There's a root reference, and there's a reference for each one of the available children. So we're going to write using setValue and/or push. Why is that? Because setValue only writes the value to the node, and push also generates the unique identifier. So to start with this in writing the code, we first need a reference. We're going to define a couple of variables here, one to a reference to the database, another one for the node that I'm working with, that's message. Usually you do this at a singleton. I'm doing this in the activity because there's the only Java file that we're going to have here. So we get an instance for the database, get a reference for the message child, and use set value to write to it. And easy as that, we can write to the database. It will look like this. And for the other one, we need a little bit more things. We have a button, an edit text, a listener. We define a different child. In this case, it's words. That's a little bit of boilerplate for the handling of the layout, the UI elements. And on the onClick event, we're going to grab the reference for this words child and set value. Notice that on getting the reference, I'm also calling push at the far right of that line of code. That will allow me to write different children, each one with an own unique identifier. Okay, let's see this on Android Studio. By the way, a side note that I forgot to mention, we're going to need a file that's generated by the console. This is a JSON file that holds our credentials. Let me show you. It should be right here. And it holds several different references to the project. So we need to add this to our project in Android Studio. I'm going to just execute this and go to the console. OK, here's the console. Here we can see the database and the emulator. When the app started, this new node of data appeared. And now I can write anything here, like my name is Adrian. And each one of the messages will appear as a new node under the words node. So I can write anything, and they will keep appearing. This is the unique identifier that I mentioned before. OK, back to the presentation. In order to retrieve the data, we work also with a reference and add a listener. We can also query the database. It's like getting only one value, but it's more common to use like subscriptions, as I mentioned, listeners for changes. And these listeners could be for either a node and all their children, or for a specific value. OK, so here I have a show message method that will help me for that. And here it's the listener. I'm using the message reference that I've said before and adding a listener for a value event. So when the data change, I'm going to check that I'm indeed getting something from the database, parse that to a string value, and then call that method show message that writes both a toast and also to the log. And if anything happened and the request is canceled, we're going to show an error message on the log. These two methods are mandatory under the value event listener. And for the child event listener, it's something similar. We have different methods for different events. We're going to work with the onChildAdded. This method is called every time the app starts and there's an established connection. It's going to grab all the children that are before that node under that reference. And every time that a child is added, also, this method gets called. So we define the reference for words and use this method to get the data. There are other methods for different kind of events, like when a child change, the value change, like when a child is removed, like when a child moved from one node to a different one, or likewise the previous case when the request is canceled. Okay, let's see that working. Here we have the log, and I'm gonna add a new message. So here's the toast, and it should be also here. I don't know why it's not in the logcat. Check, yeah, it's the monitor. Let's try again. New value. Let's put to this side the console. Yeah, it's not showing on the logcat. I don't know why. I don't want to spend much time here, but the way to get the values, it's through listeners. So you will be working with listeners like this one, that eventually will show up, with a lot of value or child event listeners. Okay, so that's Firebase, that's the database, and that's working with building blocks like Lego bricks without instructions. But also there are these shiny sets where we can follow a little bit of steps and build something predefined. So we're gonna build a to-do list app. We want to look like this on the left-hand side, and the data, it's gonna look like the right-hand side. Notice that we have the unique identifier, and under each one of it, we have 3 fields. The username of the user that's creating the new item, the item itself, and if it's completed or not. We're gonna add a way to make it completed, make it finished, with a click, and deleting the item with a long click. Before diving into the Gradle file, it's important to separate 2 things here. One is how you work with Firebase. The other one, it's the app itself that includes a lot of my ideas on how to implement a to-do list app. It's important to make a difference, mostly because when we are learning something new, sometimes we struggle with the specific of the person who wrote the tutorial video, book, or whatever we're learning from. And I want to be really clear about this. How to store and retrieve data was like the first part of the talk. And now we are going to add a little bit of another things to make an app, a simpler one, but an app at the end of the day. But it includes a lot of my ideas on how to handle it. That might be not the best one for you. OK, so here's our Gradle file. I'm working with Butterknife. I'm working with the database. And also, I will be working with Firebase UI. Mostly because for this kind of app, we need a way to show the data we have stored on our database. And that's usually a list view or a recycler view. I'm going to use a recycler view, and Firebase UI is going to handle all the changes to the recycler view made by the data, adding new data, updating the data, removing the data. All this is going to be handled by Firebase UI. OK, a couple of things on the layout. We have a recycler view. We have an edit text and a text input layout wrapping it. We have a floating action button. And the recycler view needs layout for each one of the rows. We have here a text view with a large text, another text view, and on the right-hand side, it's image view to show a green check when the item is completed. OK, so here's it's a relative layout with the recycler view, then the text input layout, and the edit text, and the floating action button, all for the main activity layout. Also, the row that includes a linear layout, then another one for the text view to have the items stacked, and finally the image view that eventually is going to be to show that the element is done. And that is our layout. Okay, we need a model to work with this. This is a simple plain old Java object. I rather use the whole name, mostly because in English it's a pollo, and in Spanish that means chicken. So all the time that I'm saying this, it feels a little bit funny. Okay, so the model. It's not mandatory to do it when using Firebase, but it really eases things up. And when we're using Firebase UI, it is mandatory. So our model is going to include these three elements: the item itself, the username, and if it's finished or not. And we have an empty constructor for Firebase to use JSON and serialize the data, the JSON data, into a Java object. And also we have another constructor for us for building items. Here are not showing the slide, but there are also getters and setters for the three fields that we have. Okay, more code. We're gonna be working with an application class to store the references. We also need recycler view, and the recycler view needs an recycler adapter. This is going to work with Firebase UI. We need to define a view holder. Hopefully you are familiar with recycler views. If not, I'm gonna try to explain it in a way that everyone can understand. And then we're gonna work with the main activity. Okay, first, the singleton or application class. We have a node called items and its reference. On create, we set up the database just like before, but now we have another feature. We're calling the method setPersistentEnable to allow caching and offline support. It seems a little bit strange at first, but yeah, it's just that. Just that line of code, setPersistentEnable to true, allows us to work with data offline. The library itself, the database Firebase library, stores the data, and eventually when there's a connection available, either it's Wi-Fi or data, it will send whatever it's stored. Small caveat to have in mind: if the application closes, all the data that we have will not synchronize. Okay, then we have the items reference, and we have a getter for it. We don't need a setter. We are initializing on the onCreate method. The manifest, much like the first app that we saw, needs the internet permission, and also we're specifying the name of the app to have the application class. Okay, working with the Firebase UI library needs to implement, inherit from the Firebase recycle adapter and implement the populate view holder method. We're going to implement two methods. Also, we're going to implement onCreate view holder. This is because the library is expecting a static view holder. But as we are calling non-static methods for the click handling, the view holder can't be static. And if we don't override the onCreate view holder, there will be a crash and it will compile, but on runtime, it will not run. Okay. So here's the view holder. We have the text views and the image view. We're using butter knife for the binding. And also, we're setting the click handling. When there's a single click, we're going to grab the adapter position, grab the item with that position, and get the reference with a method that's from the Firebase UI library. With getRef, using the position, we get the Firebase reference, and this is quite useful because now we can write to it when there's a click on each one of the elements. The way to do it is we change the pollo. in this case, we're only changing the finish field, then build a hash map with the key being the key also in Firebase and the value, the new value. And finally, we call under the reference that we got from the position, update children. On long click, it's something similar. So we're calling remove value, this line. And this will allow us to remove and update elements. Now the recycler adapter, there's a constructor that calls the superclass. And here's the method that I mentioned on create beholder that needs to be implemented because we are using non-static methods for the click handling. Okay, the adapter, it's just a call to the super, to the main class that this one is inheriting. And this is the method that we need to inflate using the layout for the model. For the populate beholder, that's the method that you will always be needing to implement. We're using Firebase Ui Library. We use the elements previously defined, the description, the username, and if it's complete or not. If it's not finished, the visibility is set to invisible, so it will not show anything. For this part, we're only using a get item, get username from the model and setting that to the text fields. And for this, we're just checking if it's completed or not. And that's the adapter. For the main activity, we're going to set up a username, set up the recycler view, and add items when the button is clicked. We use the application class previously defined for the reference. Here, we're just setting the things for the activity, binding with butter knife. Here, we're setting up the username. How we do this, we're just generating a random number and adding that to Android user. For now, that will be the way the user identify. And using the application class, we're going to grab the items reference, use that for the adapter, and the adapter for the recycler view. As easy as that, we have the recycler view set up. For the writing to the database, we use butter knife to handle the on-click event. We grab the username from share preference, grab the text that the user entered, and hide the keyboard, and write to the database. And basically, that's it. It will work like this. So let's see it working. OK, now this is the write up. That's my identifier. I'm going to write some element. I must finish the Firebase slides. Here's the new element with all the fields configured as my app. And here I can also do a click to show it's completed. It changed this node. And also, I'm going to add another one, test to be deleted. And after a long click, it disappears. OK, so that's pretty much the basics of building a simple app using Firebase. Now we're going to add authentication, also using Firebase UI. This is going to be the layout. We're not going to write any code for the layout. It's all being handled by the library. What we do need to do is enable the providers that we want to work with. In this case, we're going to work with Facebook, Google, and email password. And this is a flow chart of how Firebase UI handles the authentication. It checks for a smart log. It checks for a previously defined account. There are several steps that are important to know, all defined in this flow chart. I took it from the Firebase Ui Library page, so you can check it out afterwards in the slides or in the GitHub of the library. So we changed a little bit of our Gradle file. Instead of using Firebase-UI-database, we only use Firebase-UI. That includes auth and database. Also, we're going to add the Facebook application ID In this case, I'm reading from Gradle properties file, where I have defined the application ID. I also need a Facebook application, follow their setup and wizard and everything. But once I have the application ID, that's all I'm going to be needing. Okay, now on the singleton and on the application class, we're gonna add another element. It's a Firebase auth reference, a Firebase auth object. Much like the database, we initialize this with a get instance. And we're gonna be needing a new activity, the login activity. This one doesn't have any on the layout, and on the Java code, we grab that Firebase auth reference that we just defined on the application class and use a method. In this case, I named the method doLogin. In this method, I'm trying to grab the current user that's authenticated. In case that reference exists and it's not equal to null, I'm going to grab the username, write that to share preferences instead of generating a new random number for the username, and start the new activity. I'm using a couple of flags here because I don't want the activity to be in the stack. So when the user hits the back button, it doesn't show him the activity where the login is being done. Okay, if there's not a user, we're gonna start activity for result using auth UI and the providers that we want to use for our app. And as simple as that, we have authentication configured. This is all what we need. On activity result, we're just gonna check that indeed it's a sign in and the result is okay. And if it's completed in a right way, we're gonna call again the doLogin method. In this case, the user will be not equal to null, and it will take us to the next screen. Okay, this is the way we'll look the new authentication flow, and this is the way it looks on the Firebase console. So I'm gonna change for the to-do list, including authentication. Execute this again. Wait a couple of seconds for it to load. Meanwhile, if I wouldn't want to use Firebase UI, I'm using it for both the database and the authentication. For the database, I will need to attach and remove the listener by myself. That means adding a child event listener for the changes and modify the adapter, adding and removing when it's needed. And for the authentication, I would need, I think it's using the old to-do list app. I'm going to remove it again. And for the authentication, we will need the layout and also handling the flow. It's not as difficult as it might sound. It's pretty much simple, but with the library, it's much simpler. And it's really nice to have the library doing the heavy lifting, if there's any, for us. OK, trying again. OK, now it worked. So you can see in the bar that's the name of the account that I just created. I'm going to add here a new item, test item. And now here in the database, it's the new item with the new username. And now I have an option to do a logout. Hopefully I won't break anything. I'm going to choose here none of the above and use a different provider. Let's try Facebook now. It tells me that I already have an account. I'm doing the sign in anyway. And now in the console, we can see on auth that the account, I'm going to bring this up. The account, the email, it's associated with the providers from Google and from Facebook. It's really nice that Firebase do that for us. It takes a lot of work of working with both infrastructure and backend. And this basically take care of it for us. So with our Firebase, as I mentioned, with our Firebase UI, that is, a couple of things that needs to be done. And also security rules, I wanted to revisit this. Right now, with only authenticated users being able to write and read, we still have something that's not really common, that anyone can change the values of any other users. So if we want to restrict this for every user to just able to change their data, we need to add a new node, including the owner, storing the UI, the UID. And in the security rules, we're going to add a little bit of a couple of things. OK, we have the rules, like the root element, another element for the items, and we have this like wildcard indicating the item ID. With this, I'm referencing each one of the items. I could use this for the unique identifier generated by Firebase. The read is not an issue. I just check that out it's valid. With the write, I need to check that indeed there's an authenticated user, but also there might be two cases. One is that it's new data, so the data doesn't exist before, and the other one is that the data exists, but I want to check that the user ID of the data that's being written to, actually the data that's already in the database, I'm using this node user ID, it's equal to the UID of the authenticated user. And also I'm validating that the new data, that is the data I'm trying to write to the database, has the child user ID. With the rules, there's a nice simulator that you can use. As I mentioned, it's not that intuitive as you might think, so a little bit of trial and error. But hey, these are the Lego blocks. These are the building blocks that we're going to use. And I think Firebase, it's a really nice tool that provides a lot of different features. We can choose what to use and what to ignore or use in the future. And eventually, I think it's going to grow even bigger because Google is pushing really, really strong. The other day, someone told me that from the new question in Stack Overflow, 1 on each 4 or something like that were on Android, on the Android category, were related to Firebase. So a lot of people are using it. I went to a hackathon in Mexico about a month ago. There were like 30 teams, and about maybe 23, 24 use Firebase, different kind of features, but Firebase at the end of the day. So it's nice to know which are the tools and how to work with them. I want to end the presentation telling you a little bit of what I do. As I mentioned, I'm from Guatemala. One of the main reasons that I wanted to be here was to encourage more people from Latin America to speak at conferences both in the US and Europe. I believe there's the same talent everywhere, in every part of the world, but there's a big difference with the skills. So there's a gap that a lot of people is working to reduce or close, a gap between the talent and the skills. The context of working with several talented developers enrich you very much. And on that effort, I just taught a MOOC working with the university where I work, Galileo, and edX, the MIT and Harvard platform. We had around 26,000 students. For me, it was a really nice experience, very humbling having that many people. And to my knowledge, it's the first one in Spanish that includes subjects like architecture, MVP, clean, testing with JUnit, Roboelectric, dependency injection, common use libraries like Retrofit, Butterknife. Eventually, what I'm looking forward is to raise the bar, to get more people into doing better quality Android apps. And well, as I mentioned, I'm really happy to be here, really honored to be in a conference that have so many talented speakers. And I would like, as I think this is the last talk, I would like to encourage everyone to keep growing this amazing Android community. I think it's very diverse. It's very inclusive, so let's keep building this nice community together, and thank you.